It's about grassroots. It's about these local models. It's about environmental justice and inclusivity. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the governor for helping us to get there, because we need it more than ever. You can read his credentials. He's an academician. He has been an incredible legislator. He continues the mission, and I think we all would like to be him. Thank you, Governor. I'm going to have you come up now.
Dominique, thank you very much for not just your kind comments, but also getting us all together here and your leadership. I will tell you, she mentioned that she left EPA, and look what happened to that agency now. I think you left a little bit earlier, but still, I am so pleased to be here, and if you would pass on, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk later, but to Wendy New as well, how important I think this is. I'm also pleased to be here. Let me also say, by the way, I'm going to draw on several different careers in terms of my comments and still stick within the time limit. But I was very fortunate to have significantly different, some of which Dominique referenced, but I served 27 years teaching at the University of Maryland, which I absolutely loved. And then 31 years in elected office, and I'm now in my 16th year heading a national, international nonprofit. And I will tell you, just a couple of years ago, I was speaking in Chicago on the issue of gender equality. And with modesty, I thought I gave a pretty good speech. And the person introducing me had talked about the 3 different careers and what I had done in those 3 careers and everything. And so when I finished my speech, I asked for questions. There was one young lady up front. She raised her hand with great enthusiasm. And she looked at me and she said, "How old are you anyway?" And she had added all those careers together. But as you know, in many of the career centers, you overlap and bring things together. So I am very, very pleased to join you this morning to talk about the extraordinarily important topics of climate change and sustainability and the future of our world. Now, let me acknowledge straight up front, I am not a technical expert, and I look at this collection of brains and technological and scientific knowledge and so on. And in fact, my 17-year-old daughter refers to me as a technological Neanderthal. And so I am not going to try to intrude into your area of expertise at all. And in fact, what I've been asked to do is to give maybe more of a view from 20 or 30,000 feet about what is going on and where we're headed. I was specifically asked, and I think Dominique, it might have been you, to be relatively provocative on this as well. So having said that, let me go ahead and jump right in and say that something that most people are aware of, but we are in the midst of a real crisis in this country. And time is not on our side of most of these issues. There are, of course, very important public policy issues to be resolved in a number of areas, certainly healthcare and infrastructure and quality of education and things of this type. But there are also, however, 2 major threats to our future. The growing inequality, inequity among our people, and the definite impact of climate change. Now, I started, by the way, my career as a humble political science professor, writing books on American federalism and intergovernmental relations. Doesn't that sound exciting? Don't you wish you had a chance to read those books, which are still available on Amazon? But that's where I started. And so then the question sort of becomes, how did I get in the position to be a national, international spokesperson about the relationship between land use patterns and sustainability and what we are doing to our planet across this country and around the world. It's not as if it's genetic and you're just born an environmentalist or you're born a person dealing with sustainability. It's things, hopefully, that we are learning, that we're picking up. I remember in my own case, I was going to school at Florida State University, which is in Tallahassee, Florida. I was working my way through both a graduate and undergraduate, and I had a job anytime I wanted to, a couple extra days in Hialeah, Florida, in a machine shop. And the interesting thing was, it was almost exactly 500 miles from Tallahassee to Hialeah. And I would drive that regularly, a number of times a year. And I went by the edge of the Everglades. And over just those years by being in school, I saw what was a clear demarcation for the Everglades turn into an ever-widening intrusion of subdivisions out into the Everglades. And I saw the federal and state governments subsidizing this by widening all of the roads. Today, if you go on those same roads, which used to be the barrier for the Everglades in the 1960s and 1970s, you will now find 140 miles of subdivisions built out into the glades. And it is having huge impact. And even then, though I didn't consider myself an environmentalist, I knew instinctively that something was wrong. And then I moved to Maryland. I was elected mayor, as we mentioned, to the Hyattsville City Council. And Hyattsville, right on US 1, a beautiful place with old 1880, 1920 homes, except for US 1. US 1, a series of used car lots and gas stations and fast foods, was just plain ugly. Understand when I was an elected officer, I never used that word. But it was, and the worst part was there were no people there. There was nothing but automobiles there, and everything was automobile oriented. And we started the process of making change. And one of the questions we asked, why can't we take these almost parking lots like this and convert them into useful, productive asset for the city and for the county and the state? And I was told that it was easier under our system to go out in a greenfield and buy a farm and build a new office park or subdivision than it was to reuse what we already have. The system is built against reinvestment in existing communities. And so we started thinking about that and changing, and made a number of changes at the county level when I was county executive, and then moved on to governor. And the Chesapeake Bay was right on a tipping point, as Dominique mentioned, of being lost forever. And we had all kinds of moratoriums and everything else going on. And after looking at some stuff, and again, this is no science background at all, it became clear to me it wasn't what was going on in the water, it was what was going on in the land. And unless we effectively controlled what was going on in the land, we could put 100% pure water through the sewage treatment plants and everything else, we were still going to lose the bay. And that was the origins, really, of the whole smart growth movement, which is now nationwide. And so what we came to the conclusion is we had to stop sprawl, and we had to stop the sprawling patterns of development that had emerged. I mean, think about the way our system is set up. We have to get in a 2,000-pound machine, called an automobile, and drive 2 miles to get 1 quart of milk. Now, is this a rational system at all? Is this a good use of our resources? And so we created, looked at this and said, this is a growth pattern that is simply not sustainable. Not sustainable immediately for Marylanders, not sustainable for the world. And that we must change, and without exaggeration, this is also about the future of our planet. And as we look to the future, there is some good news. There's some very realistic, hard news that is alarming, but there's also some good news, and particularly with regard to land use patterns and things that projects you see like right here. But we have several powerful forces today that are pushing us toward growth patterns that are less car dependent. And I always ask people, why are all these areas adopting new land use provisions and all? And most people say, well, it's because of your great speeches. Few actually believe that, but there are forces causing significant changes and helping us move toward a much more walkable, transit-oriented development pattern. Most people refer to that change as smart growth. When I talk about the forces that are working with us for change, the first force is really leading to much more sustainable growth patterns, the demographics themselves. Demographics in many ways are working in our way, The emerging population groupings are different. The baby boomers are living longer. They need or want to be part of the productive economy, and they want to be in places where there is a sense of place. Remember, it used to be you retire at 60, you go down to South Carolina, sit on the back porch, and watch the birds fly by, and you die at 70. That's only a slight exaggeration, but that's the way our policies were built as well. Today, if you're 60 and you're in good health, statistically, you're probably going to be 83 and in good health. And that means you're going to be involved in the community, and you're going to be involved in the economy. And so baby boomers are making different choices today. The big change is coming from the millennials. The millennials absolutely choose where they want to live and then go look for a job. And what they're saying is overwhelmingly, they do not want the hour-and-a-half commute. They do not want the acre-and-a-half subdivision. They do not want to need to get into their car to go any place at all. It's like my son, who has his own business in Washington, D.C. He doesn't mind working at 9 o'clock at night, but when he comes down that elevator, he wants to be able to go across the street, walk across the street, meet a couple friends, have a drink or something, coffee, I'm assuming, and then he gets on the subway, 2 stops, he's home with his wife, and within his immediate neighborhood there's at least 10 very nice restaurants. This is the millennial style of what increasingly people want, and that is not about sprawl. That is about sustainable, walkable communities. A second major driving force that is changing everything is the nature of economic development. Economic development today is, and especially for the knowledge-based part of the economy, is based on having communities where you attract the talent pool coming out of college and elsewhere to where they want to live. Suburban research centers, office parks, and things of this type increasingly find a difficult time. Look at the Raleigh Research Center in North Carolina, which is reworking itself entirely to be a mixed-use research center, including retail and including residential. And when asked why, the major research companies there said they could not attract talent to just come to a suburban office park, and they're making a move. That's why GE moved out of suburban Connecticut to downtown Boston, as an example as well. We have, and I won't go into detail, but all these materials are on our website, smartgrowthamerica.org, including this particular study called Core Values in terms of what is happening with the changed economic development. There are 2 other forces that are significant in terms of their impact, and they are causing significant concern. Alarm bells are ringing. The question is whether we hear those bells, but the alarm bells are ringing. We will face both economic and humanitarian crises if we do not address them in a focused and effective way. I'm talking about the growing inequity in this country and the increasing impact of climate change to the country and to the world. Now, with that very calm and reasoned introduction, let me tell you what we're talking about here really is the third force about the growing inequity. It's tearing our country apart, and we have to recognize this. The middle class is losing ground as a share of the population, and the wealth aggregate is being concentrated more and more in the hands of few, with a broad-based shared prosperity declining and declining significantly. The Pew Research Center just made an observation that our cities and towns are rapidly in danger of becoming the home of only the very wealthy and the very poor, with others being forced to the margin. We should remember that the richest 10% of the U.S. households now control 70% of the U.S. economy, own 70% of the U.S. economy. That is not sustainable for a people as well. The issue is not about tax structure and a concentration of wealth by itself. It is also about access to health care, access and affordability of higher education, affordable housing in most communities, and environmental safety. All of these wrap into the larger issue of equity. Just think of what the impact is coming from our drinking water problems and from our drought and from the constant flooding that is going on, and realize who is most impacted in these areas. I mean, we can't even fix our municipal water system that is putting poison in our children's brain in some communities, and yet we talk about no circumstances can we require a total rebuild of this, because after all, we might have to spend money. And so, let children become educationally deficient as a result of that. What we need to think about is that for every decision that we make in both public and private sector, we ought to be looking through a prism, a lens that asks a basic question. And I clarify when I say prism, because I have a bit of a southern accent from growing up in Florida, and some people think I'm saying look through a prism. But it's through a prism or a lens, and we have to ask a basic question. Does this policy or this action reduce or expand inequality? And that becomes a fundamental issue for every public policy, and it should be for most private policy decisions as well. And that's why when I was invited to be here, I was so excited about it, because this is an example of people coming together and trying to apply this type of lens to these decisions. The final powerful force that's causing change in how and where we grow is climate change itself, and the constant need for mitigation and resilience. Despite the climate science denial statements that we see coming from the White House, despite that, I will tell you, climate change is real, and it is here now, and it is going to get considerably worse no matter what we do. And the question is, can we just mitigate over the long run? We know that climate change, droughts, and related massive fires, and along with extraordinary levels of rainfall and microburst and dangerous floods from both storms and tidal surges are the new normal. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that you don't see some community really, really struggling with this massive impact. And by the way, if you get away from the talking heads of television today and go to something like the BBC, you'll see that this is extraordinary, the new normal all around the world, and that we simply must address that. When I say it's a new normal, I live in Annapolis, Maryland. It's a wonderful little town, goes back to 1699. It was one of the first towns in America. And the downtown area, this year alone, has had 52 days of sunny day flooding. Not a storm, just the water backing up, coming over the walls and backing up the storm drain management system and coming right out into downtown. Flooding significant enough to close a portion of the downtown area, 52 days in 1 year. While many understand that climate change and understand it's real, what a few people have found, and some others, is that they do not believe that it's going to cause great change to them personally. It always looks like a story on television, but it's not happening here. But the reality is, it is happening here, and we have to make sure that people understand now is the time for action. Adding to the urgency in this issue is that those with the fewest resources are going to be the hardest hit by climate change. Some projections of the earliest grand-scale devastations are just staggering. If you saw some of the flooding in South Asia just recently, the conclusion of almost every expert is that in Bangladesh, in the next 15 years, over 18 million people will have to be relocated out of the area that is flooding significantly. Try to relocate 18 million people in an area that is so explosive with other divisions within it, and you've got a potential major world-scale disaster. As we recognize these forces of change, the next step is obviously to ask, what are the tools that we can use to address the changes and to create places where people want to live and want to work? Let me just mention a few ideas, and I'm going back to my beginning point of watching the time, but I'll just mention these ideas and encourage you to go to our website and look at them if you have some interest in it and all as well. But first of all, we must design our communities with a sense of place. A sense of place, this is in line with the important work of reinvesting in existing communities and existing footprint, like right here, instead of going further and further out and tearing up more and more forest and green fields and requiring people to travel by automobiles. We also must address what we call complete streets that are for everyone. people in cars, people in transit, people walking, people with mobility challenges, moving and bicycling, and get away from the dependence on the car. We also must start using form-based codes and recognize that most communities should have a mix of use. People should be where they work. People should be where they want to play. People should not be dependent on contributing more emissions in order to survive. Second, we need a transportation system that supports all users. It supports transit, it supports walkability, regardless of mobility. And third, smart growth is an important tool in the fight against climate change. A lot of our focus is on preserving the forest and open space, reducing the need for impervious surfaces, focus in a way to incorporate the greening of stormwater management in climate solutions and in land use plans. Let me tell you a quick story. In center of our state, we have a county, Howard County. In that county is an old historic town, Ellicott City. You may have seen it on the national news. Ellicott City had 500-year flood 4 times in the last 6 years. Now something is wrong someplace, and I don't believe it's the math, it is what is occurring. I had a long discussion with the county executive there, and they were building these much larger storm drain pipes to go through to try to protect it. And I told them, I said, that's not the problem. The problem is upstream. We are cutting down the trees, we are adding subdivisions and parking spaces and impervious surfaces, and at the same time we are getting these massive microbursts. The water has no place to go. I am pleased that they have changed their entire program now, and they are moving a significant part of the solution being to reduce the destruction of trees, to do the reforestation along the several streams into this river, and literally move toward a greening of the stormwater management. Lastly, let me recognize in the strongest terms that the cost of continuing to do business as usual is simply not acceptable. Sprawl does not pay for itself. There are health implications, there are social implications, there are financial implications, and most important, there are dramatic climate change implications for the land use pattern itself. It is very important that decisions made now will determine the future of our country, both financially, excuse me, and in terms of equity, and in terms of climate change. It's really not a question, as I hear some of my environmental friends say, of whether we have growth or no growth. That is not the question. When we get in that debate, we are wasting time and energy. The real question is, where do we grow and how do we grow? And what do we do to address these issues? The basic question starts to come down, where will our parents live? Where will our children live? Of course we're going to grow, but we're not going to sprawl. Our future must not be the roll of a dice. We must not leave things to chance. Our future will be the result of recognizing the great forces that I mentioned that are changing development in this country and directing the energy of those forces into building sustainable communities that create shared prosperity and help save our planet. We can move toward a walkable, healthy, safe places, communities with housing and jobs and a place for everyone, communities that are sustainable and that help America lead the world in the fight against climate change. I know it is a challenge, it is a vision, but we can reach for it. We can do it. We really have no choice. Thank you very much.
Governor, you delivered. I think you just gave my talk, actually. And of course, we do know that this is a very cross-sector integrated public-private, NGO, academic. We've got to talk about, the title is called Climate Resilience Through Innovative Carbon Farming and Integrated Green Infrastructure for Watershed, watershed health ecosystems. And we're going to talk about carbon sequestration, and specifically, since it really is about the land, soil carbon sequestration. So this is that portion of the agenda, and I'm going to probably run through my slides, but I felt I had to put some of this information up. Where we want to inform, you'll see some familiar data. In fact, today as we speak, the UN's climate meeting is happening in Madrid with, again, somber news, increased emissions for 2019. So the timeliness and the importance of realizing that we really all need to feel responsible and accountable is now. So I'm going to run through a number of slides, and I'm going to invite my colleague, Dr. Sarkar, to talk more specifically. So we're sort of drilling down. Just the background that in October 2018, there was a panel of 100 scientists actually determined that what it would take in terms of planetary warming to